Hey, I'm Joe, and I'm a composer and a musician.
That's why we call you the maestro. And I'm Will. I'm a literal doctor.
But don't trust this guy with your ailments.
No, I study comic books, but it still counts.
We're a couple of creative kids who host a podcast called Common Creatives.
We dig deep into filmmakers, musicians, books, and characters, really all types of artistic works and the people who make them.
We break apart the art we love to see what makes it tick.
Basically, we give you the definitive take on whatever or whoever we're discussing. All opinions are definitive and final.
So check out Common Creatives wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to the 11 Life podcast.
Hi everybody, Matt here. Welcome to this week's episode of 11 Life. I am so happy to have you here with us for this episode. If you are new to the show, welcome to your new family of unicorns. For those of you who don't know, 11 Life is part of the Rock Candy Recordings podcast network, which is a network of like-minded creators who are doing their absolute best to make the world a more thoughtful, inclusive, and fun place to be. So if you haven't checked out our other podcasts like Common Creatives, Bubble and Squeak, Sacred Tension, I encourage you to head over to rockcandyrecordings.com and check them out. I'm such a huge fan of all of the people I have the privilege of being able to create content alongside of, so check them out. You will not be disappointed. I want to take a second before we get into this week's episode and just express my sentiments about what is happening in our world, in our country right now. There are so many people that are hurting, that are in pain. There's so much injustice. There are massive systemic issues and problems that are bubbling to the surface right now. And for a lot of people, it feels stressful and unsettling. I just want to take a second today and personally encourage anyone who is listening to the show that has found themselves at a loss for words. If you have found yourself feeling hopeless or helpless, outraged or angered, I feel you. I am feeling all of those things at once as well. If you feel drawn to protest, if you feel drawn to meditation, if you feel drawn to conversation or to activism, I want to encourage you in those pursuits right now. But the one thing that I want to encourage you all to do is to take a moment to listen. Take a moment to hear and not judge. All conversations are not just about agreement or disagreement. They're about empathy. If you are that person who is looking for a place to start, if you are looking for something to do, you're not quite sure if you fit in with the protesters or the meditators or this side or that side, we are sharing a link in our show notes right now. This list is compiled by a librarian from the Los Angeles area who did not want to be named, but who has put lots of time and thought and research into this list. And I just want to personally thank her right now, if she's listening to the show, for putting this list together. It is a list of different websites and organizations that will allow you to do research, to educate yourself on some of the issues and the problems that we're all facing right now, to advocate for the causes that are attempting to alleviate suffering and to bring about more justice in this world. There are many different links in this document to different organizations who are doing excellent work that you can donate to and help aid them in their causes. There are also links to several documentaries if you are just looking to educate yourself, to gain some perspective on what's happening, especially within social media. So if you have a chance this week, grieve with those who are grieving, hurt with those who are hurting. Listen to the pain that others are experiencing. Listen to their stories. Sit with them in their sorrow. We have such an incredible community of listeners here at Rock Candy and with 11 Life in particular. I love you guys. I love seeing your activism. I love seeing the way that you love each other and the way that you constantly bring new people into this small little weird quirky ass family of unicorns. And now it's more important than ever for us to be offering that type of love and support and solidarity with the rest of the world, especially our nation. Anyway, I am not claiming to have any of the answers about this, but I do know that we have a very definitive direction that we can head in, and that is to educate ourselves and to advocate for those who we know are suffering and experiencing injustice. So a huge thank you to everybody who's already taking these steps. Once again, you can get to that link in our show notes, and I encourage you to use that that as a starting point for getting involved. On this week's episode of 11D Life, I have the pleasure of being able to sit down with the co-founder of the Satanic Temple, Lucien Greaves, and talk about his brand new band, Satanic Planet. And we do a deep dive into the creative process behind their brand new album that they are working on right now. We get to talk about their unorthodox recording process and the different things that they do to tap into the creative energies that they want to put into their sound. If you want to find out more about the Satanic Temple and the political activism that they are a part of, I encourage you to check out the new documentary, Hail Satan by Penny Lane, or head on over to the Temple's website that you can get to in our show notes. So after that rather lengthy intro, welcome to this week's 11D Life and my conversation with the one and only Lucien Greaves. I hope you guys enjoy it.
I'm so sorry. I was on another call for a moment, so I'll own up to it. I just declined you when you were calling for a moment there and had to get off.
Dude, don't worry about it. It happens to everybody.
So how are you?
I'm doing great, man. It seems like you've already got a busy day.
I hadn't really anticipated it, but when this first started, the lockdown, I felt like I had nothing but time, but it feels like everybody adjusted now. So it's like I get up and I'm like, damn it, I have a full schedule again. How the fuck did this happen? I'm not going anywhere, but
right.
But I still end up with a full schedule. And I've stopped noticing so much that I'm not going anywhere either. It's like, everything's kind of adjusted. That was a weird phenomenon. I mentioned to a friend of mine yesterday, it was like after 2 weeks of lockdown, I was like, man, it's only been 2 weeks. And now it's like, shit, it's already been 3 months.
Oh man. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I'm starting to get a little bit of cabin fever. It's weird because we live in Asheville, North Carolina. So we have.
Oh, I love Asheville,
dude.
For real, yeah. No, I've been there a few times. I've always wanted to go back and check it out some more.
Yeah, well, if you get the opportunity, you definitely should. It is really, really fun. And the thing is, most of the cool things to do around here, I feel like are all the outdoorsy stuff because we have the Blue Ridge Parkway that's here. There's trails and hikes and all kinds of stuff to take. You could just you could start a little booklet of all the trails and stuff that you wanted to do. And it'll probably take you, 3 or 4 years to get to all of them. So it's kind of bonkers, but that's totally my jam. I love just hikes off deep into the woods.
Well, Asheville strikes me as what they always claim Austin to be, but I haven't spent enough time in Texas. You know what I mean? Where it's just this kind of progressive oasis in the middle of the rest.
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit weird in that way because it's Asheville I feel like is super progressive. Everybody here is kind of more in touch with the magnetism of the mountains, and there's sort of a fun, sort of hyper spiritual, what are we doing here, existential vibe to Asheville. But the rest of the state is pretty conservative and rural and. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best ways to say that, but yeah, Asheville I do feel like it's very much an oasis from the rest of the state. But
yeah, but to a certain degree, all the populated areas are like that. Even in Massachusetts, which is the liberal state, you get outside of Boston and Cambridge, and it's I'm seriously seeing Trump signs. What the fuck is this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's America, man. It's everything. It's all of it, all at one time, and it's loud and noisy and weird. And where do you really fit in?
All one big sugary big gulp of America. Gallon size Mixture of everything.
Brought to you by the Coca-Cola Company. Fully endorsed. That's awesome, man. So did you just opt to not do camera stuff, or am I doing something wrong?
Well, I hadn't even taken a shower yet or anything, so I just left the camera off. But you were just going to do audio, though, interview-wise?
Yeah, so the interview is just audio. I like doing video stuff if possible. None of the video stuff gets recorded for the podcast, obviously. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, shit, well, I was just walking around helicoptering. There you go. Okay. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
What is the whole like COVID thing looks like for you? It seemed like at the top of the conversation that you were like, oh, you're just sort of figuring out your new normal. Yeah. What does it look like for you guys?
So now we're interviewing.
Oh, it's all part of the show. Like all the little bit, everything turns into the show.
You actually do editing, huh?
Well, to some degree, if one of us ends up saying something that makes us seem like a complete asshole, sometimes I'll take those bits out. Or if something just totally derails or whatever, then yeah, I'll do some editing. But most of the time, it's something. It's more like if it takes me a second to get a thought out, or if it takes the other person on the line. There's a lot of ums and stuff.
I just meant for continuity and that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're good. Yeah. So everything looks different for you guys now in the COVID world. What has that been like?
On the 21st, March 21st, I was supposed to start a music tour with Satanic Planet. It was going to be a first like small scale tour. And then we were talking about, larger tour because we're represented by Live Nation, which was, really, really something for a band just starting out and not having really released anything yet.
That's keys to the kingdom, brother.
Right. And we were also booking pretty big venues for not even having an album out yet, and only kind of like releasing one test track. So, there was a certain amount of stress that went along with that. But we had guarantees for these shows, whether people would show up or not. But apparently we were marketable enough to assume that we would fill these places up. And I was really overburdening my schedule by also trying to plan speaking engagements that I would do while touring.
Yeah.
And what this was going to all come out to mean for me was that this was going to be the first year, kind of like the first time in my life that I would actually be making money. So I was speaking in Madison, Wisconsin at some secular humanist thing the student organization had put together at the university over there.
Yeah.
And then I went to Arkansas, and I believe that was around March 11th to do depositions in our lawsuit there for if you've seen the documentary about the Satanic Temple, Hail Satan.
Yeah.
In Arkansas, they put up a Ten Commandments monument, and they said that this is not a violation of the Establishment Clause. This isn't a breach of church-state separation because it's a privately donated monument to the history and heritage of the legal codification.
Of course.
The American laws that were predicated on these Ten Commandments. And, the concept behind allowing a private donation of a monument is that the government is not endorsing the message necessarily. Right. They're just accepting the private donations. They're viewpoint neutral, right?
Yeah.
Within certain parameters. So we offered a monument of our own, our Baphomet monument, this explicitly satanic monument to complement and contrast the Ten Commandments monument, and they turned it down. So that's a case of religious discrimination we're suing.
Right.
So March 11th and 12th, I'm there for depositions, which is lawyers kind of cross-examining me before the trial to gain information about the case they're going to make to defend the state of Arkansas for their blatant religious discrimination. And while this is happening, of course, the news is really breaking out that COVID-19 striking all across America. People have stopped traveling. in Arkansas, it hadn't been noted as an issue yet when I arrived there. But before I left, even, just staying there 4 days, it was already a medical emergency. And I was terrified to be traveling through major hubs like Chicago. Like, I'm going through Chicago O'Hare at the beginning of a pandemic. And even now, just 3 months later, people might think, well, that seems a little hysterical to be totally panicked about it. But you have to think about how much we didn't know, too. What are the long-term effects? All you know is that, these earlier stories of people getting respiratory problems in Wuhan and then dying, and I'm on a plane, and you're locked in. What can you do? You know what I mean? You're just locked in with people. Guy across the aisle from me is coughing into open air, doing nothing, And I actually yelled at the guy. I'm like, cough into your fucking coat. Do whatever you need to do, whatever. Anyways, I got back to Massachusetts and locked down on the 14th, and I haven't been out since. Of course, tours canceled, all those speaking engagements canceled, all that's done. So at the beginning, I had my schedule opened up in ways it hadn't been in my memory ever before. I've always been on the move. I've always been going to different places. I've always had a full kind of rigidly set schedule, a million things I need to get done. And even if, one thing fell apart, there was something easily to take its place. But because I was going to be touring and because I had this full schedule in place, I had made a real effort to clear everything else out, to make sure that nothing else was pending or in the way. So with that done, that was a real hard thing to wrap my head around. That was a difficult thing to adjust to. It was, and of course I tried to make the best of it, thinking like, well, now I can read stuff or whatever. But it's interesting now, 3 months later, to see how things have adjusted to the point that, as I was saying earlier, now I have a busy schedule all day because everybody's teleconferencing, all these other things are taking place, and everybody's moved their businesses online or their order of business online or whatever. To the point that I'm hardly realizing that I'm not going out anymore. I get up and morning to evening, I'll be on the phone or working on different things, writing stuff up or whatever. So things have adjusted. They haven't adjusted in any way where I figured out how to necessarily monetize that time. I'm just not going to make up for what I'm missing out on not having gone on the tours and on the speaking engagements and things like that. But I am getting a lot done. And I think like when all this is said and done, I think we've done certain things to kind of reach out to the community and keep people in touch and do events online and things like that in ways that I'm almost embarrassed we hadn't been doing previously, given how spread out our whole social network is and how a lot of people don't have access to local chapters. A lot of people deal with that sense of isolation without having this pandemic breakout. And I think this has given a lot of people a new way to interact with people, a new place. I mean, one of the things I've been doing just twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays, is I've been running movie nights. Right now I just stream them on Cast, and we're going to move those over onto TST TV, our own streaming site, where we're going to integrate the capability for people to do real-time live chat. But it's been a great experience. I mean, we watch terrible movies. Everybody comments on them in real time. And it's just been a lot of fun. And to a certain degree, you can forget the fact that you're not able to interact with anybody face to face because we have the technology to at least communicate with each other in this way. So there's been some good things to come of this. And there's been, like I've said, there's things I'm working on that I might not have gotten the chance to work on before. I'm able to do a lot more writing now. I'm able to do a lot more research. I'm considering new projects and initiatives for the Satanic Temple that I think will really launch us forward in ways to kind of like put us even more so on the map to advance the advance the kind of ethical agenda that we have and that kind of thing. So I think we've really taken advantage of it. And anytime I'm feeling down about it, I just have to look at this from a relative mindset. Maybe I'm lucky in the fact that I've known people who have spent significant time in prison. Yeah. And this is not that. I just think of them and I think of here I am locked down with I can order marijuana or liquor. Those guys can do that. I've got a pile of books. I've got a PlayStation 4. I've got Yeah, that's the thing. Like right before COVID started, some fan of our band ended up gifting me like an Xbox Live membership or like a Game Pass thing. And I was like super unfamiliar with this, but I've found myself in front of video games more often in the past few months than I ever have in real life. I have to have a lot of structure in my life that either I have to enforce upon myself or that I need like a network of people kind of holding me accountable, because I feel like my biggest struggle is that I just fall into these awful patterns of like, okay, well, it's past noon. Maybe I'll have a drink, and like, oh, maybe I'll go buy a pack of smokes, and maybe like, that'll help me think about something. I'm just like drinking and smoking way too much, not being able to socialize with my friends, like not getting any of these like social cues that I would normally get, like, being out and around and having a schedule and leaving the house a lot. Well, I think I was a bit luckier in that regard too, because for the past many years now, I've worked on my own terms, right? Yeah. But I remember like when I started doing that was an adjustment, right? And the tendency is to like treat every day when you're not on somebody else's schedule as though it's kind of the weekend, and you fall into bad habits really easily.
Yes.
Felt like I already was to the point where I'm good at managing my own behavior and schedule. So I felt like I kind of had a head start on that in a certain respect, I felt that other people would need to, that might be a harsh adjustment for them. But with the video games, I've always had them and I've never played them much. I've always meant to like myself, like one day I'm just going to stop like burning myself out on work so much, because I tend to work on projects, work from morning to night, until I pass out, get up and start again.
Right.
And thinking like there's going to have to be a time where I take a sustained break. And I always thought doing video games would be one of those like hobbies I would just really get into, like one of those, thoughtless kind of things. But I think it's kind of a interesting fact to note that, I read a lot, but I always feel obligated to read something that has some kind of relevance to the real. I'm always reading nonfiction, I feel like I'm kind of cheating myself if I'm not learning something. So
you feel like the things that you decide to read, you feel like have to have some sort of utility to them.
Yeah, so they have to be really educational or whatever. It's just this mindset I have. But that said, I found that I start playing a video game, I don't even have tolerance for like those 3D worlds in which you have to like search for an object or whatever. Right. Like I don't have the attention or tolerance to like go into a video game and like go into like this AI social environment and like try to solve the puzzle or whatever. It's like I just want to get in and start shooting shit, or whatever it is. I like the most mindless video games possible. I get irritated really fast with I don't know.
No,
I don't know. I feel like maybe there's kind of a dissonance there, but
no, I think we're very similar in that regard. I can't handle video games where I get in there and it's like, you're shooting people and having a good time, just like engaging in violence. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, now there's like a puzzle you have to solve, or you have to really explore the area because the only way out of it is this one like hidden thing over here. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, those irritate the shit out of me when it's one of those things where you're sitting there and you're like, all right, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing now, And part of that probably has to do with my my failure to pay attention to some of the exposition and the dialogue going on or whatever, because I just expect to get in there and start shooting zombies or whatever.
Yes.
But I don't know. That might be weird given my approach to books and other things. But video games, I really want to be mindless.
Well, maybe it's.
See, I'm learning things about myself during COVID-19.
You are. It's interesting because I feel like I can see this other side of you who's like on the outside of Lucien looking in, and it's like the books that you read must have this specific type of utility. There must be research in some way. Like, don't waste time reading something that's not going to be like helpful to all these other agendas that you have for your life. And then you have the other side of you that's like, okay, well, you're playing a video game. It's fine. Like the video, like your fun doesn't have to have utility.
It doesn't matter.
Yes. Right? So I was wondering about that because I know that you guys had that tour canceled. Were you guys doing any sort of tour prep and rehearsals and stuff like right before COVID hit, or what did that look like for your band?
To be honest, I was a little stressed out about going live as soon as we were, because we had just finished studio sessions, and it was kind of questionable whether we really finished the studio sessions too, because we hadn't started mixing and mastering. Right. So the idea that we would re-record things was still present, and we had done all this work in something that did not nearly approximate a live setting, right? We're in the studio and we're working on these things, and like I would bust out some vocals and we would screw around with the different types of processing and stuff like that. And we weren't doing that in real time. So it was like, okay, we don't even know how we're going to emulate this live yet, and then I got to go do these depositions, and depositions were going to be done on the 13th. I was going to go back to San Diego on the 17th. That's where my bandmates are. And we were going to take that time from the 17th to going to the first show on the 21st to really work out, the live rehearsals and everything. I hadn't even memorized my own lyrics yet, but that, I'm sure we would have worked it out. It was still really exciting to do. But that said, of course, we didn't have enough time to really work out theatrics either. And we want these shows to be theatrical. Right. And we had kind of spoken to each other about how we wanted these shows to be as kind of interactive as they could be, to be less of a live show and more like a real kind of satanic congregation, you know? Right. In some of the tracks we put together with that in mind, even we had a track for Unbaptism. Unbaptism is the title of the track, but it was meant to be accompanied with an unbaptism ceremony. And we talked about like cycling people on the stage through to get like unbaptisms during the track. And the track itself is like 4.5 minutes, something like that. It's it's still not final mixed and mastered right now, but it might be longer or shorter as that goes on. But for the live version, we were talking about like extending it to like a 10-minute kind of presentation, doing these kinds of unbaptisms and everything. Okay, and a lot of the lyrics were taken from the unbaptism ceremonial script laid out by Shiva Honey, who works with us and does a lot of our kind of ritual work and everything. And she's doing the backing vocals for Satanic Planet and everything. Oh, fun. So we hadn't had an opportunity to get together like props, costuming, that kind of thing to really set the mood and the atmosphere and everything. But we've been doing that now that we're on lockdown. And in fact, since we got into lockdown, I just set up my own gear in my office so I can record things and send the sound files to the guys I'm working with. And one of the tracks we were collaborating on that way since lockdown, we've decided is good enough that we want to put it into the album now. And now we're going to start working on a whole second album just remotely during lockdown. Because at first there was that feeling like, let's see where this goes and see like maybe when we can tour again. And, then there were these kinds of idealistic notions that we get an idea of when this will come to an end, right? Yeah. and we can try to schedule an album release to release just on like, vaccination, around vaccination date or whatever.
Right. So that was my next question was like, do you guys have a definitive game plan for putting out your first record?
Well, now it's like, we just got to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And it was actually only since lockdown occurred that we recruited former Slayer drummer Dave Lombardo onto the act. And in his lockdown, he's just been recording over the tracks or retracking like parts and inserting them into what we're going to mix and master for the album. And that's been kind of a whole new wave of buzz for this project.
Yeah.
Which again, like most startup projects never get this kind of attention. But Dave Lombardo does an interview with Rolling Stone, and they're talking about, what are you doing during quarantine? And he's, first thing he says, I'm doing Satanic Planet. Right. It's like, well, that puts us on the map in a whole new way too,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got your 4 horsemen. I mean, essentially, to do this.
Right. Right. Well, that's the thing. Like, I mean, that's why all the buzz, right? Yeah. There's the novelty of the spokesperson, co-founder of the Satanic Temple doing the vocals, and Justin Pearson from The Locust and Planet B and Dead Cross.
Yep.
Also doing supporting vocals and guitar work and that kind of thing, musical background and everything. Yeah, working with Luke Henshaw, who Justin works with in the project Planet B, doing musical backgrounds, compositions, everything else. And, Dave Lombardo coming in. So, there's...
Well, get a little nerdy with me about what your creative process looks like. You said that you have some production gear and that you were sort of demoing things out. So it sounds like you guys are sort of like swapping demo ideas like throughout quarantine, and it's working to the degree that you're already thinking about a second record. But are you like, do you flip open your laptop and you like head straight for Ableton or Pro Tools or?
Yeah, I'm using Ableton. And I used to do everything with Acid.
Yeah.
And that was just really easy and intuitive for me.
Yeah.
Ableton, I get frustrated with, and it's not necessarily due to any failing with Ableton. It's just probably one of those things like it just does a lot more than I'm used to even working with it all.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's in my best interest to work with Ableton because some of the, we're doing really industrial style stuff. So some of the vocals are really processed in robotic and, that kind of thing. And you can run, those kinds of effects into Ableton tracks that you can run your vocals into live in real time.
Yeah.
And you can do things with Ableton also, like you can have your lighting set to Ableton so that the timing is just dead on. And so are you
thinking about this like as you're demoing? Are you thinking about the visual components within Ableton at the same time, or?
I'm trying not to, honestly. Like when we're in the studio, I was trying to like keep my mind away from like live presentation of it, because then you start getting into a whole new thing. And the fact of the matter is like, I mean, going into the studio was stressful itself in the same way that the idea of going out live so early was stressful, because we had started out, and I've played around with experimental music a lot previously, but I had not necessarily with thoughts of releasing it as a full scale project or working with like professionals on it, but I hadn't really worked with vocals, so that was like a whole new thing. And when, Luke Henshaw started sending me some background rhythmic musical type stuff and just being like, what do you think of this kind of ambience thing? Like, is it something you want to work with? And originally the idea was that it would be more like a spoken word thing, right? Novelty album where it's like Satanic Temple, doing like these spoken word, like maybe ceremonial type things or whatever.
Like underscoring rituals. Is that kind of
right? Yeah,
okay.
that kind of thing. Yeah. Like, I really think the idea was more like a kind of like obscure novelty release kind of thing, in the spirit of like LaVey's own Black Mass album and that kind of thing. So he started sending me these things, and I'm thinking, and I've got like a bunch of material written that's Satanism relevant and everything. Yeah. And to me, that's kind of like, I mean, it's important, but it's also material I've gone over again and again, right? And I'm trying to be more creative, and the more creative I'm getting, the more I'm getting musical, And then, but my problem is like I'm trying to listen to these things, and because I'm not used to working with vocals, I feel like I'm trying to construct whole songs from the top down in my mind. And it wasn't until I just started experimenting with stuff and like putting in parts or whatever. And then we really started doing that in the studio, and I had no idea how that would really work out, but it really worked out great. And I think we were really kind of mystified at like some of the earlier home runs we felt we had, because they felt so accidental. You know what I mean? It wasn't until we got in the studio either that we started just plugging things together, and we heard, just that contrast between my kind of just scary monotone vocals contrasted with Justin's screaming kind of desperate highlights,
Right.
But it worked out so beautifully, that I think we really started rolling on things. And it just, a lot of it feels so lucky, even like the track that we put together in the lockdown that we're getting, that we're going to have on the album now.
Yeah.
Because Luke sent me just this kind of like basic John Carpenter-esque, like kind of synth background.
Oh, man.
And then I put these vocals to it that worked out well with that. And then he starts messing with the music again. It becomes something completely different and deranged, but we love it, and I'm really, I really just want to get this out there. But at this point, Lombardo, I think, has finished tracking all the things he's going to track. And this is his kind of breakout performance as something more than just a drummer. He's starting to work with like electronic sounds and things like that too. So I think everybody's having a really great time with it, because we're coming at it from such an experimental mindset, just with a, just thinking like, okay, how does this sound? And we're not even trying to stick to whatever genre we feel like we may have created by the couple tracks we put together at first, because, next thing we work on might have a cumbia type vibe, because, Luke also works with a cumbia band, and this whole series of vocals I put together for one track, he just put this cumbia backing to, which is like Cuban drumming and stuff like that. Really, this more loungy atmosphere sound to it or whatever, and it probably sounds a little out of place, but we're also like, fuck it, it's like, it sounds great. Let's put it all together.
But what does it really mean for something to sound out of place? Like if you're in this creative flow and you happen upon something, which just sounds like you guys have had so many happy accidents throughout this process. Like how do you know that it's a happy accident? Because it elevates your spirit in some way. Like it makes you feel like, oh, this moves me, or I find this really interesting. There's something about this that's totally working.
I have this tendency where it's like, if I'm working on something, if it was difficult for me, if I had to think about it really hard, then I'm really proud of it. And like some of the things we did in the studio, I felt like were accidental and came afterwards in the production, where it was just like, oh, okay, that sounds great. But then I kind of disregarded it because it wasn't hard enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it only takes like months later, I listen to it and I'm like, oh, I think that's one of the stronger things we did,
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to have that distance sometime before you can have any appreciation for what you're doing. But I'll tell you, when it's difficult, when you have that idea of something being out of place, it's when we had done like a kind of a background for about 4 tracks when we were in the studio, and they all sounded completely different from one another. And the the band management we were working with or whatever said, you guys have to release one thing publicly, because they, at that point, we hadn't had Live Nation. People were interested just because of what it was, the whole idea and things like that. But it was like, we need to be able to show the, the promoters, whatever. I don't know the whole breakdown even on this.
You have to have a product.
You have to show them something. So they're like, you got to release a track, like one track. And then it was like, no one track is representative. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to release one track. I don't want to release one other track right now. Like, I want to release the whole album. You got to hear this whole thing, So that's where it's difficult,
So what does that creative process look like for you guys? So you were taking trips out to San Diego so that you guys could all be in the studio at the same time?
Yeah. I think that was necessary more for me, to break out with like really just having to take that time to lay out the vocals, because if I'm on my own, I'm going to really overthink it, know, and I'm really going to, I'm not going to allow something to sit as it is.
Yeah.
But if it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we have this block of time, we're in the studio, we're working on this track now, I'm wasting other people's time kind of thing.
Right.
Then it's like, I have to bust it out on the spot, and we have to just see where it sits. And now, because we've done that, and because I have a bit more confidence in what I'm doing or whatever, I feel like I'm better prepared to sit on lockdown at home and exchange files. We'll still put it on the time crunch. I'll be like, all right, let me work something out and send you a file by the end of the day kind of thing or whatever. And so, I mean, that's how it works out to me. But in some of these circumstances, literally what happened is, Luke would be, fucking around with something. He'd be like, what do you think of that? Does that sound cool or whatever? Yeah. And I would just listen to the rhythm of it or whatever, count syllables, bust something out or whatever. And we would like plug it in and play around with it. Yeah. And then, it would mutate from there. And then we'd be like, how did this happen? This is like this seems so very well thought for how, how it actually came together,
Yeah.
But I couldn't be happier. Like I said, we started out with, thinking that this would be a one-off, like Lucien Greaves with Planet B, kind of like spoken word thing. And it's become its own act, that, we're talking about doing a second album for music project of its own. And the lyrics and everything, the whole theme has moved beyond just throwing out like, satanic themes, things to just being like more general, evocative, like free creative flow music. It's become just a real music project.
So what's this going to look like? I know that you guys have had some of these conversations about what this looks like live, but what is the instrumentation breakdown in the band? Like you'll be doing vocals live, and then Dave will be drumming live, or no? Will it all be kind of like on tracks, or?
I assume Dave will want to be doing drumming, but I can't say for sure because he seems really happy with the fact that he's been doing other things, right?
Yeah.
And so I he might want to have drums and other gear. I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure. Luke, I'm sure, will have keyboards, and Justin's going to be doing vocals too. And I don't know if he wants to be playing guitars live or whatever, but we just never got the opportunity to do rehearsals. And I'm not going to worry about how they do their end of instrumentation or backing vocals or whatever. But I'm certainly going to think about theatrics all the while. I got a new pair of horns for the whole thing. I'm thinking about getting some puppets together, things like that. Like I really want it to be a visual experience, And we talked about the kinds of visuals we'd have projected on the screens and things like that. We really want it to be a good, intense multimedia experience. And I do have solid contacts with people who've done that kind of work before,
right.
And I want to kind of, see how much I can tap them for their experience or maybe support.
Well, I feel like you guys haven't even put a record out, and there's got to be tons of like indie horror filmmakers that are just like dying to have the budget to hire you guys to score their movie, just for the novelty of it, just for all the hype that it seems like that everybody's so stoked about you guys doing this.
I really can't wait for the album to come out, because I think I think honestly, it's kind of a low bar where people would be satisfied with a much lower quality product
Right.
just because of that novelty, right?
Right.
But I listen to what we've come up with, and I'm so proud of the final product. And I know that regardless of who it was, it would be that this would really speak to a lot of people. This would be, for some people, this is going to be their favorite album of the year when it comes out. And I also think of the people who are going to come to the Satanic Temple and the body of writing and the whole movement through the music, and just how powerful that will be to some people, and how powerful these performances can be. So it might sound funny talking about like the theatrics and horns and stuff like that, and coming out and doing these types of things. But for some people, I'm sure that, this can be a very evocative and moving experience.
Man,
and
I think that's
I
what
want to
people
do
are.
everything to live up to that.
Of course. I think that's what people are missing right now. Like I feel like the reason people go to shows is to experience something. Like everybody remembers being at a concert and having, Coldplay play a certain song, or there's something that it's tied to another memory, or to be experiencing art that all of a sudden causes you to see something in a different way. And when those experiences are multimedia, when somebody did go through the process of saying, hey, we're not just going to do this live set thing, we're also going to include these visuals. We want to create something a little more immersive than like guy with a guitar or guy with a keyboard. I think that those decisions pay off. Like I think that the effort and the time that you put into creating an experience for someone, I don't think that goes unnoticed. I think people really enjoy it.
Well, we were in the studio, and we were working on some of these tracks, and we had a tendency to set things on a loop and listen to them go through, while constructing them or whatever. And there was early on, there was some of those points where we created these loops. We plugged the vocals in, different sounds, and it just set such an immersive environment in our minds. And we thought, all right, we really nailed it here, and it was hard not to imagine like having this blaring in a whole, in a crowded environment, and the whole mood that this would set.
Yeah.
And and that's I think when we really knew we were onto something there, we really, I think early on when we had set some of those loops and just had them going and developed sea legs from them, we were like, okay, this is a whole project of its own. And this is going to be a meaningful thing, and that's that's an experience I think that, I'll take to my grave.
I think you have so much joy that it seems like this project is giving you. I really hope that you're able to maintain that it still feels as fresh and new to you whenever you guys do get the opportunity to tour and to see this sort of come to life.
Well, that's why I think it's important for us to work on the new material that we're going to do now, even though we haven't put out the first album. It's not even mixed and mastered yet. We're still talking about, we're still working on second album material. I think, we just want to ride that wave of what feels lucky in our creativity until it comes to a halt, because why not?
Right.
If we can keep that going indefinitely, then, there's no reason. It would be a crime not to.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like it took me a very long time to figure that out because I started playing music at such a young age. Everything just felt so infinitely important to me all the time. And so like you have your whole identity sort of wrapped up in this in a band, and you can almost like form this weird toxic relationship with this manifestation of yourself, like which would be your band, like who you are in this band. And then I feel like it takes a lot of unraveling and undoing to figure out how to just kind of let the band be its thing and ride the wave when the wave is happening and experience that joy. Because no band lasts forever, no project lasts forever, no creative bubble, lasts forever. It pops at some point, or it just transforms or morphs or moves on. But experiencing those in the moment, I feel like is one of the coolest things that you can do as a person.
Yeah, and to create a track that you truly like, something that you would listen to, just that creation process is just a whole new way of experiencing music that just isn't available to you otherwise.
Yeah.
And it made me think, we started early on even talking about remixes and some of the people we could reach out to because we know some, high profile musicians, and, it'd be great to get them, remix collaboration or whatever, see what they come up with. And then, and now exchanging these files so that you have an appreciation for stems alone, like isolated vocals, isolated synth tracks, isolated, just to hear the component parts that go into these tracks. I would like to, especially now thinking about these things during lockdown, I would like to talk with the band management about just releasing the stems and letting people create their own remixes and things like that, put their own additions to it, subtracting, just making those available for everybody to play with it so they can have something of that type of experience with the music.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of tracks I wish I had this, tracks that I love that I had nothing to do with that I wish I could just play with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just isolate the different parts and sustain them, create them, like draw them out, whatever I want to do, chop it up. You just remix it, play with it. It's such a fun thing to do that I think it would be really cool if we're able to do that, put out a release of just the stem files.
Yeah, I think people would think that was super cool. We did something very similar to that when we put out a couple records ago. We had a song on there that we just took we put everything into stems, like maybe 7 or 8 stems, and then made it available for download just to have people do whatever they wanted to do with the song. And it was really, really fun to get back some of the remixes and just hear how people would take one single element and then turn the song into something totally different just based off of this one track. I love that.
Yeah. And, now that we're talking about it, I feel like I should reach out to those guys and be like, maybe we should just do a track that way. Like an open source almost track where it would be like, I could come up with maybe like some basic verse or chorus or, some background or whatever. And then we could put some instrumentation to it, but leave it kind of as an open source project.
I mean, it also gives everybody who is your fan agency to be more than a fan. It's almost like you give them this opportunity to be sort of these pseudo collaborators, like from this original material.
Well, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what fandom for Satanic Planet looks like. You know what I mean? Because because I'm me. And people don't separate me from the Satanic Temple, and it's Satanic Planet too. So it's like, in a certain way, it's almost like we have a captive audience, or at least we have a ready-made market.
Right.
Nobody's going to feel obligated to like it, even if they're, members. I mean, there's going to be members of Satanic Temple who just aren't into this type of music, and that's fine. You know what I mean? There's other people who are going to love it, and it's going to mean that much more to them because they're part of the Satanic Temple and there's that attachment to it and everything.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. There's the question of toxic fandom. I think far ahead on that kind of thing, but we'll see.
Just ride the wave and let the toxic thing happen if it happens.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. So what are you? So it sounds like you're doing a whole bunch of like distorting and modulation with your vocal effects. I think I've only heard one track that you guys have up on the internet right now. So I feel like it's really cool to kind of catch you at this really particular moment where you're sitting on a bunch of unreleased material and your band is more the idea of your band than it is a band yet, because you haven't been able to do shows, but everybody's so pumped about whatever it is that you're going to be. Does that feel empowering to you, or does it stress you out?
It feels unwarranted to me, because I feel like this buzz is giving us credit for something that's unproven now. And I really feel a drive to like get it out there to vindicate all of it.
Right,
you know what
right.
I mean? I'm like, because if it were not me and I were looking in on this, I wouldn't be impressed just by the names going into it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'd be like, well, let me hear something first. And yeah, we released that one track, but honestly, that was like less than a week into being in the studio. And that was like one of the kind of first things we put together, and I like it, but yeah. There again, it's like not representative,
right?
You know what I mean? Because like there's so many things that are so different. And there were people who really liked that track, and they could be disappointed that other tracks,
right.
are nothing like that. It's just it's hard to say, and that's. And that again is like the problem of releasing like just one track. Not that, some people might not like it and not realize that a lot of it's totally different from that, but people like it a lot and really want the rest of it to be a lot like that too. So, and even that track isn't the same anymore. That was pre-Lombardo, and he went back in and started bumping with that too. So it's like, that's a whole different thing at this point. So,
yeah,
I'm hoping that we're going to be done with mixing and mastering by the end of this month, and then we'll be shopping labels. And then, and I honestly don't know how long it takes from securing a label to putting out your release.
Man, it just depends. I feel like it looks different for different labels. A lot of times, though, you're looking at least 9 months out. Even with a finished product, just because everybody wants to get like a legit marketing plan in place, which like even within the music industry, those conversations are changing entirely now, because there's no live performance. There's no like, we can't go meet and greet. We can't be in the same room with this entity. They're all having to figure out how to like push tracks on TikTok and Instagram and create these weird sort of online Easter eggs to have people follow.
I don't know if that expedites things or slows it down, honestly, because like at this point they might be thinking, okay, physical copies are out, and maybe like digital copies is much something much quicker to get to market. But there again, if the marketing plan has changed, that might slow things down, or maybe it's roughly the same. It's hard to say, but it is kind of a new world for a lot of people right now, and I can hear the frustration. I mean, it's new to me. I've never worked with a touring band, and the band manager we were working with before, I thought, she was just particularly slow to acknowledge the COVID-19 threat. And it wasn't really that at all. It was just that when it came to touring, nobody at the beginning wanted to be the first person to pull the plug, because, there's the issue of contractual obligations and financial liability and things like that. And everybody's just kind of wondering if the other guy is going to be a prick about it. You know what I mean? And it's like, so I felt like venues were waiting for bands to say like, okay, we can't do this. And bands were waiting for venues to close it down. And it kind of brings up a whole different conversation, maybe one that's not appropriate here. But just the whole idea that, that there's that freedom to go to work and act as you will. But really, at least in a situation like this, I know at the beginning, people like myself were desperate for outside intervention to come in and say like, okay, you guys can't do these gatherings, because that absolves everybody from those kinds of questions, right?
Yes.
And then like an issue of like, okay, who owes who what or whatever. It's like, nobody has to say like somebody else like preemptively did anything. It was like,
exactly.
There were involved.
Well, and a lot of times, especially with acts who have, there's like a substantial guarantee that the band is getting for coming in. A lot of times, like within those contracts, there will be something called an act of God clause, which feels weird for me to be telling TST this.
Right.
But it essentially does that. It absolves everybody from the financial obligations they have to each other if something like a COVID happens. But the thing is, like, you're absolutely right. You don't want to be the first person to jump up and say, okay, well, I'm the one that's pulling the plug on this, because like nobody knew how this was going to play out. Like, we had this whole tour of Japan lined up and we're ready to go. It was just like a few weeks before we were getting ready to get on the plane that COVID started becoming this really big thing. And we were talking back and forth with the label there in Japan. And it was like, we were getting all of this like conflicting information, because everybody was telling us here, like, oh, it's going to get bad, it's going to get bad. And at the time, like, Japan was getting even worse. And they were coming back and telling us, like, well, it's totally up to you. Like, if you want to come here, you can. we'll still do the tour. And I was like, wait, aren't your schools closing right now? Like, it was such a weird time to try to make decisions, because you don't want to be the bad guy. You don't want to be the guy that like doesn't get it.
Yeah. But this is unprecedented. Nobody dealt with this. And at this point, we're not assuming anything. It's like earlier on, it was kind of easy to speculate that there would be a distinct endpoint for this, and that when that happened, everybody would rush out and just be
high-fiving.
Thrilled to be out in a crowd, parties out on the street, whatever. Yeah. But I don't think that's necessarily the case now at this point. Like this, the end might not be a real distinct cutoff point. There's not going to be a worldwide kind of vaccination day. There's going to be waves. It's going to be uncertain. I mean, we'll know when done is done.
Yep.
Generally, I'm sure, but honestly, people might be slow to get back out. We just don't know. We don't know the psychological toll this will have. I think, ultimately people will, of course, go back out to concerts again. People will congregate when they can, because that's just a natural kind of human impulse. But it might not be the opening of the floodgates that I originally imagined. Out at first, and then dip a toe out tentatively for a bit, and people might really have an aversion to being shoulder to shoulder, at least for a little while. And
yeah, exactly.
They're going to not like music, right? And people are going to want, especially on lockdown, especially in isolated circumstances of isolation. People are going to, they might not be going to movie theaters, but they're watching a hell of a lot of movies, right?
Right, right.
And so I think all we can do now is just kind of move forward, release the album, and hopefully we'll be able to get back into touring. Second album comes out, Well,
I know that there are going to be people listening who want at least like a rough time frame of when you think that the release would happen. But you guys are in the mixing and mastering phase right now, so I don't know if COVID is slowing that down as well, or if it's something that can be done remotely for you guys. But are we talking like a few months, like in the fall or sometime next year, or what would be your wish for that?
Well, the plan is to be shopping labels by the end of this month, and I think we'll get picked up. Things look really good for that. I think we'll get a good deal.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get it fairly quickly. I mean, all evidence points to this being very marketable, and labels being interested in it. And if I remember correctly, Justin said there was already label management expressing interest, asking directly about the project.
Right.
From credible labels that we would definitely consider the offer from immediately. So I think we'll get that. So then it's just a question of how long after that does it take for something to get released? And that, like you said, that could be, a good 9 months or whatever, which is a shame. But
Oh, man. Well, I think it's really cool that you have made something that you feel really proud of. And this is, I mean, this is a little bit weird because this is an immense amount of musical privilege that you have. I think just by all of your associations and all of the hype already for a project that's as of yet unreleased and still evolving. I think that is super cool. And I hope that it turns into a really, really fun wave for you to be able to ride with everybody.
Yeah, it comes at a great time too, because, there's a lot of, in order to stay sane, I need to kind of like mix up the things I do with, by doing other things, right? Great thing to do while also not feeling like I'm, kind of throwing away my other responsibilities, because I still feel like I'm giving something back to the community that follows my works. You know what I mean? So it's not just kind of this, so I don't feel like it's necessarily this kind of like self-indulgent off-base thing, just for my own personal benefit of preserving my sanity and indulging my creativity or whatever.
Right.
But I really think, and I hope that, the people who follow my work previously will really appreciate this work, and it'll be something that's meaningful to them as well.
Yes. I hope all those things for you. So in terms of what is next for you, I don't know what the deposition situation is going to, or if we even like kind of came to a close on any of that. But I feel like that conversation morphed into me imagining you like being on tour and like in between shows, you're also kind of like showing up in court at random places.
Yeah. No, that's a possibility too. And even those things, the lawsuits are kind of up in the air now too, because courts, most of them were closed down for like a couple months, and I still don't know what the rescheduling looks like on a lot of that, you know, and the trial for the Arkansas case was supposed to take place in July. Now I don't know about that, but we're going to motion for summary judgment, so that might never go to trial at all anyways. We feel that the facts are indisputable and that the judge can rule on them without the tedious trial taking place. But, everybody and everything is still somewhat on hold and still readjusting to this whole new reality. And I think it's kind of been brought back into a state of confusion due to the fact that so little has been done to address how we actually reopen in a sensible manner. And we just kind of fell into this idea that we'll just simply reopen without having gotten testing in place or whatever, which of course is inevitably going to lead to another spike in infections and, shutdowns, at least regionally, maybe nationally again. So it's just so hard to predict what's going on. So all I can really do right now is just schedule my own work.
Yeah.
I can just schedule times in which I write and times in which I work on music. Yeah. And put those things together and just try not to worry about the rest of the process and when it's released and all the other elements that go along with it. But at the very least, at the end of this, like I'll have a whole body of work that may not have been possible if it weren't for this pandemic.
Of course. Oh my gosh. I love that kind of positivity. I was wondering as we've been talking like this whole time about music and like how Satanic Planet is kind of coming to be and what that situation is going to be like, however tenuous. I wondered what your influences were. Like, are there specific touchstone bands that you grew up with? Were you a scene kid? Were you into like totally left field stuff or?
I've always had I'm a real sucker for novelty. It's like, I'll travel overseas even, and I'll see things on a menu and I'll look and I'll say that sounds disgusting. Like, how do these things even blend together? Like, who would even think to throw that into a dish together?
Right.
I'll take one,
the toothpaste cheeseburger. That's it.
Yeah. And then I'll order it, just to see. Like, I'm a sucker for novelty. Yeah. And then I'm kind of like that with artistic projects too. If it sounds like something I've never heard before, if it looks like something I've never seen before, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I've always really been into avant and experimental musical work. So to that end, I've always worked more on, personally, I've always worked more on like noise type of music.
Yeah.
Really worked on soundscapes that just sounded like things, sounds that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
Working with this has been so much more structured, but I think that mindset went into it. And so it turns out much more, really more industrial than anything.
So when you say structured, like I know that there are a lot of singer-songwriters that listen to the podcast, and I'm wondering if you're talking about just a creative structure where you all kind of, you all have your say and you're figuring out what you want this to be together, or if it's like, oh no, there are songs with inherent like popular song structure into them, like we're doing verses, choruses, bridges, bringing it back to a chord, or if you're like, no, that's not at all what we're.
No, in some cases that's exactly it, right?
Okay.
Like I verse, chorus, verse, like we've done that.
Yeah.
We've got that, like real defined rhythms and beats kind of thing, you know, like that's par for the course with most music. But like I said, I would work with a lot of noise and soundscapes and things like that.
Yeah.
So now it's interesting, to work on, creatively with other people. And that has not been a defined process. It's just been kind of back and forth in the studio, talking about it and then fucking with it in real time. Right. Thing. But it's interesting to hear, like I was saying, we weren't finding consistency in our tracks and what they sounded like. But now after some months and then listening back on some of our roughs and everything, I'm thinking like, okay, in some ways this is more consistent than we even recognized at the time when we're in there. And one thing I think we've really done that didn't strike me until listening to later is we have really hard, heavy, brutal tracks that are at low BPM. And I feel like we kind of mastered that kind of like
so kind of sludgy.
Yeah, just a sedate kind of brutality that I just don't think you get from a lot of acts.
So are there specific plugins that you feel like you gravitate towards whenever you're writing or like doing vocal processing, like format shifting, pitch shifting?
Well, I've got a Helicon Voice Live Touch 2.
Yeah.
And it's been great, but to be honest, that's going to be used more to emulate some of the production work we've done after the fact. Like I kind of thought I would use that raw, but it's very variable. The Helicon is a good, it's really great, and it's a fairly inexpensive, I think, for what it is. Like back in the day, something like this would have been, several grand. I think the Helicon Touch 2 is like $500 at this point or something like that.
Yeah.
I also have a Chaos pad, which I was really excited about. But honestly, I've used that pretty minimally too. And so no, there hasn't been any real consistency in plugins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in some cases, I think people would be surprised at how little processing went in, being how weird my vocals sound anyway.
Okay.
Like, there's this one track we did, Gray Faction, and it's, themed for our Gray Faction campaign within the Satanic Temple, depending on people know about that or not. And my vocals sound really kind of growling and raspy in a weird kind of drunken and deranged kind of way, and almost in a strangely robotic way too. And I think people would be amazed at how little processing went into it for it to sound that way. That was actually that was actually me. But in other tracks, the processing is such that I'm going to have to work with, the equipment I have to work out the ways to emulate that live.
So what's going through your mind whenever you're approaching a song like that? And because that's like, it's not your American Idol type singing. It's not like quintessential sort of pop melodies or anything like that that's going on. It's like, it seems like whenever you're creating these vocal parts that you're almost like embodying a character, or you're figuring out a way for like the human vocal format to fit into this pre-existing landscape? Like, what does that look like for you? What's going through your head when you're figuring these parts out?
It's trying to use the vocals more as an instrument. I guess everybody does that, but in ways, I guess, that maybe the standard vocalist doesn't think of it. You know what I mean? And I, came into this not having confidence in the vocals and wanting to rely heavily on the kind of processing and using, my vocals as kind of like a starting point for like an instrumentation sound.
Yeah.
And, to be honest, part of that diminished confidence came from the fact that we were approaching Mike Patton to contribute vocals. And I think he's like the human living on record now with the highest range, with the broadest spectrum and vocals.
Right.
And there's nothing that guy can't do vocally. So to be kind of like a first-time vocalist, like confronted with the idea of potentially being on an album that Patton will contribute to is very intimidating. Any cheat tactic you possibly can to work along with that. But also, like, I like that. I like when people mess with their vocals in that kind of way, when people use like electronic instruments to filter their vocals through and make the vocals kind of like an added synth sound or whatever else, and that's kind of the mentality I had, like, just what can we put into this track to make it sound like regardless of lyrics and everything else, like just the kind of sound that would go with it. But I mean, to be honest, like Luke had a real mindset for that, and I didn't necessarily have to do a whole lot of thinking in that regard. Like, I think we really, we really lucked out in just having like matched visions on what sounds cool with things, and he's an experienced producer, in ways that he can do things in the course of a couple minutes that I would take hours screwing around with too. Right. That's really expedited the whole process.
I love that. Well, I'm super pumped for all of this cool shit that you have that at some point will happen. It'll be rad. I wonder if you could give us like what's a band that you're super into right now that you feel like might be informing some of your creative process?
As for creative process being informed, I'm not, some of it sounds nothing like that, but I was listening to like this weird avant band called Kaboom Caravan that I just happened upon online recently. And Luke and I were actually exchanging tracks by this guy Basinski, who just works on these kinds of like really extended kind of loop atmospheric type stuff, and did some soundtracking. And one of the more recent bands I really love and have had the pleasure of befriending the performer who's responsible for it is Blank Mass out of the UK. He's in Scotland. Did a soundtrack recently. I don't even know what the film is, what the soundtrack's for. I don't even remember what it's called. But he also has an album out most recently, and that's really electronic stuff too. And I'm hoping to get him to remix one of our tracks as well.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of great stuff coming out, and I know there's a lot of people I'm forgetting to mention who I'll kick myself later for having failed to plug them. But,
all good. So what's so in terms of books, like what's the book that you're reading right now that's nonfiction and is also doubling as research for you?
There's a book called Active Measures that just came out that's about disinformation campaigns starting from really the Cold War and up into social media, Cambridge Analytica scandal and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I really think that's an important topic. People should be more aware of, online disinformation and conspiracy theories being spread for the express purpose of benefiting one political camp over another.
Yeah.
especially as we go into the next election. And it's a really gripping history, honestly. Sometimes I read some of this stuff for its educational value, and it can be really dry and academic, but the book on active measures is really it's a really engaging read, and I recommend it. And of course, I keep plugging this book, but so I should do it again because it's such an important topic, and I think it gives people such a good idea of what the Satanic Temple is up against. But The Power Worshippers by Catherine Stewart, talking about the rise of Christian nationalism, religious nationalism, kind of theocratic overthrow of the United States government. So that should be top of people's reading lists in my world.
Of course.
That's the required reading.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, dude, we have totally gone the time, and I really, really appreciate you taking time to share with us all this, like, things you have simmering during the COVID crisis, because I think it's going to be super sweet.
Yeah, and I, just tell people to, I'll tell people to follow Satanic Planet on Twitter or follow the Facebook page or whatever, because I just don't know. Maybe we'll release some stuff earlier rather than later. Maybe there'll be some digital releases of stuff that won't be on the album or whatever. I really don't know what we have planned, but if people pay attention, they'll see whatever activity comes up.
Well, I can't wait to have you back on to talk about the actual music that you release at some point.
Let me know. I'm up for it anytime.
Will do, man.
11T Life is a production of Rock Candy Recordings.